Alright, welcome to the last installment of videos on Chapter 1. During this video, you are going to be able to answer the last of the guided readings questions. Those are questions 14 through 17. Things like, what was the motivation of Gilbert and Raleigh to come to the New World? What three things came together to create support for English exploration and colonization? What were Gilbert's goals or promises in regards to the New World? And how did Richard Hakluyt, I know that seems weird to pronounce, but that's really how it's pronounced, attempt to convince Queen Elizabeth to venture to the New World? I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce it later, but that's really how it's pronounced. All right, let's kind of reset the stage of where we're at. Queen Elizabeth is in power in England. In about 1560-ish, we're going to pick up. Really, the thought kind of drifts towards colonization in America. They see how well Spain has done, and I guess the motivation to come to the New World, and to do that, she's going to enlist the power of two gentlemen, Sir Humphrey Gilbert and Sir Walter Raleigh, who are two adventurers that have helped, in the case of Sir Humphrey Gilbert, fight in wars against France. In the case of Sir Walter Raleigh, adventurous in that he spent a lot of time plundering Spanish ships, basically stealing silver off Spanish ships. So she's going to try to incorporate these two gentlemen to help out with the effort to colonize the New World. And really the reason for doing this was to challenge Spain. Spain had got a lot of prosperity through their colonization of the United States, or of America. And Queen Elizabeth decides that maybe she wants a piece of that too. She would like to rival Spain. Now, the problem was she wasn't quite ready to pull the trigger on making this happen. The relationship with Spain was a pretty decent one. They were an ally against a common enemy, France. And Great Britain, or England, had spent a lot of time selling, or a lot of effort selling cloth to the Netherlands, which at this time is controlled by Spain. So there's a relationship, there's an economic relationship there that she's not really ready to kind of sever. Instead, now that doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship was hunky-dory, because there was definitely some concern. Spain was the one of the more powerful countries in France, or in Europe, so really wanted to kind of protect themselves. One of the fears that England had during this time was the island nation of Ireland, that was to the west, really feared that France and or possibly Spain could use that as a launching point to kind of take over England. So what they do is they absolutely repress the Irish. England moves into Ireland to take over basically the country. And they really think Ireland is kind of lowbrow, like savages. So they basically overtake them, and they attempt to civilize them. And when they're doing that, they won't let them have arms. They don't have any rights to own land. So they take away all their basic rights as they're doing this. This is kind of seen as almost like a model of how they're going to colonize in the United States, potentially using force if they have to. That's something that they would do. When Gilbert and Raleigh return from Ireland, they're kind of seen as heroes, although stories go that a lot of people are put off because they like to let everybody know how well they've done, and it's off-putting to some, but they do kind of get a lot of special treatment. Like I said, they wanted to challenge Spain, so that is still kind of out there. Now, how England moves to the place where they eventually decide, like, it's go time, we're going to make this happen. First of all, there is a rebellion in the Netherlands. The Dutch kind of rebel against Spain. Spain responds as you think they would, and basically they destroy one of the main cities that England does trade with, which means England is a little disappointed. They have to find new markets to sell some of their products, which again was one of the ties they had with Spain, so they're not happy about that. What happens in England is they form what's called joint stock companies. Joint stock companies are just like you think of owning stock today, that a lot of people invest money, maybe little small chunks of money, to own little small chunks of the company. So joint stock companies were used not only for business, but also in this case for exploration. A lot of private investors were kind of getting together and contributing a little, potentially to allow people to sail to the New World and potentially to colonize there. Another driving factor is high birth rates among the upper class. Now, this allowed for a surplus of sons, really, that happened. And all these elite English people are looking like, hey, when I die, I want to give all of my sons an estate with land. And the fact of the matter was, there was this high birth rate, meaning there was a surplus of sons, and a lot of the elites couldn't find land to give to their heirs, and this was a problem. So colonies would help to solve that issue a little bit. Now, what really allows Queen Elizabeth, she's still kind of not ready to pull the trigger. Spain really is the one that makes a decision for her. They kind of make it not very much a secret, make it well known that they would like to restore Catholicism to England. And whether that's voluntarily on behalf of the English, or if it's not, they kind of promise that they're going to come in and they'll do it forcefully if they need be. This, in essence, is kind of ends any last kind of reservation Queen Elizabeth has, and she okays the idea for exploration into the colonies and potentially some settlement there. So kind of the reasons for her coming to this conclusion was obviously establish, this idea of English nationalism. There's this pride of we're not going to get pushed around. We'd like to expand. We talked about like the upper class wants to give land to their sons. They want to expand English Protestantism, the Protestant religion. It's easier to say it that way. And then economic interest. There's all kinds of jobs over there. There, opportunity over there. It isn't created, but they feel like they can create jobs over there. Land interests. So there's a lot of economic interest that England is kind of thinking about as well. One of the first people that is kind of tapped to maybe explore is a guy by the name of Martin Frobisher, who was really not the greatest of ambassadors. He tries to go, obviously we're going to go west to go to the colonies. He's working on a Northwest Passage, thinks he finds gold, brings it back, and there's all these like black rocks, and he finds that it's not really gold, and he's kind of a laughingstock. So he's kind of the first attempt, and doesn't really work out too well. The second attempt is, again, we go back to Humphrey Gilbert, who's given a patent by Queen Elizabeth that is pretty lucrative. It really makes him the sole proprietor of land. What that means is like the owner of land between Florida and Labrador. And if you're not sure where Labrador is, it's in Canada. It's in the northern part of Canada. So that's pretty wide sweeping ownership of land. So this is a pretty big deal for Humphrey Gilbert. And really not much of a direction kind of given. Basically, if it's not settled already by Christian faring people, and the word there is Christian faring, meaning if you encounter Indians, they're not Christian faring, they saw them as savages, it's okay to settle there. Gilbert's idea is he wants this to be a manorial land, meaning like an English manor, like he wants to be the head of it. He sees that there's going to be a lot of like farmers that will pay him a rent or a fee, and he can kind of collect those fees. In the same time, he wants this to be a utopian society. He's going to give anybody that settles there like a tract of free land, and he really wants it to be a nice place to be. He also advertises government to be chosen by consent of the people. That sounds kind of familiar. I think I've heard that somewhere. So that's kind of an idea that he has in this utopian land. Gilbert runs into a small problem as they kind of set sail over to maybe attempt to set up the first colony over here, English colony that is, and he runs into a bit of a problem with a storm, and he is a little arrogant. And in the midst of this storm, he decides that he's going to not take shelter. They're going to keep pressing forward. He sits on a deck reading the book, and he dies along with the rest of the crew. So sorry about that. No good for him. Sir Walter Raleigh kind of comes back into the picture. He's like, hey, Sir Walter Raleigh and Humphrey Gilbert are, by the way, our stepbrothers. So he's like, hey, my stepbrother had a pretty sweet deal. I would like the same one. And again, he runs across this guy, Richard Hakluyt, who writes a book called The Discourse Concerning Western Planting. Western, by the way, was spelled like that. So if you're like, Mr. Dennis, you don't know how to spell, you probably would be right, but not in this instance. I'm going to make a lot of errors, and so get used to the typos, but that's not one of them. So he writes this book, A Discourse Concerning Western Planting, which basically he kind of details like, hey, these colonies are perfect for spreading the Protestant religion, search for the Northwest Passage, meaning you go northwest to get to like the Indies, challenging Spain, and new jobs, new goods, and new markets to sell things. Like, these are perfect for this. So Queen Elizabeth does give Sir Raleigh the patent. In 1584, he sets sail. This is where things get hairy. There's a couple attempts made to colonize by, Sir Walter Raleigh. They eventually get to North America, and they are kind of floating up and down the coast outside of North Carolina. Eventually, they establish relations with the Roanoke tribe. There's the chief. His name is Wingina, and they kind of establish relations with them. It's going to turn south here pretty quick, so don't get used to Chief Wingina. He's not going to be around for too long. They named the land of Virginia after the Virgin Queen, and this is kind of they pay honor to them, and that's the establishment of Virginia. So that is Sir Walter Raleigh. So the first settlement occurs at Roanoke. Person in charge is a guy by the name of Sir Richard Grenville and Ralph Lane, which for some reason always makes me chuckle. Like, everybody's Sir something or other, and then we just have Ralph Lane. Sounds like they're like, hey, you need a partner. And there's this guy watching the Dolphins with chips all over his shirt. Hey, take that guy. Ralph's not doing anything. And if you're wondering, that was just a joke. It's not historically accurate. We didn't have the Dolphins nor potato chips, so he couldn't be watching them on TV, obviously, in 1580. So these two are picked to head up the settlement in Roanoke. Doesn't work out too well. They attack the Roanoke tribe. They kill Chief Wingina. And as the Roanoke are prepared to make a counterattack, basically they see some English ships kind of sailing around. They flag them in, and they abandon Roanoke pretty quick. There is a second attempt to settle at Roanoke. It does not go very well. There's mistakes all over from the very beginning. It just does not go very well. Person put in charge is a guy named John White, and a lot of the settlers are called home to fight in the English war against Spain. They go to war with Spain, and they're called home to fight. When they return, the colony is completely abandoned. There's an ominous message written on one of the trees that says Croatoan, and they're not sure exactly what that means. If the remaining settlers have been killed off, if they have moved into the center of the soon-to-be United States, or they've died off, what happened, they're not sure. It's known as the Lost Colony of Roanoke, and those people are kind of gone to the ages. Who really knows what happens to them? So at the turn of the century, in the year 1600, England still has no settlements in the United States, and they really would like one. They look at the Spanish conquistadors and what they're doing in in the colonies in North America, and they're really kind of frustrated. Portugal has established a very thriving slave trade. They're making a lot of money off of that. England has nothing, and they're really kind of frustrated. Sir Walter Raleigh wants another try. Right around this time, 1603, James I kind of takes over. Doesn't particularly care for Sir Walter Raleigh and has him in prison for treason for the next 15 years. Upon his release from prison, he decides he's going to go back to the Americas, this time South America, and kind of go back to his roots and plunder the Spanish ships. That doesn't work out so good for Sir Walter Raleigh because he's eventually captured and beheaded. So long, sir. It's been a good run. What to take away, and this is kind of where we're going to end up, is James I has a great desire to colonize the America. Probably more so than Queen Elizabeth. He really kind of wants to double down on those efforts. And we're going to see kind of in the chapters going forward, Jamestown was kind of the first permanent settlement in 1607. There's going to be all kinds of different colonies up and down the coast, from big plantations to kind of religious-based colonies. People come here for all different reasons, and this is going to create a lot of difference among the United States. Remember, this isn't these colonies aren't going to be one concerted effort. There's a lot of different reasons and a lot of different people from different backgrounds coming here.